Welcome everybody to Word Up on Zoom. We of Word Up acknowledge that some of us are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe and Huron-Wendat people. Word Up is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in a spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And also happy Lunar New Year. I guess that's today.
Oh,
yeah. So happy Lunar New Year, everybody. So we are going to begin tonight with a panel on creating a romantic element, keeping the sexual tension heated. Now, if you're anything like me, you struggle with these sorts of scenes in whatever genre you write in. So tonight we have three experienced romance writers with some insight on how to make your scenes more steamy. So tonight we have Rosanna Battigelli, author of 5 Harlequin romance novels. MJ Morris, she's a mixed genre author, including steampunk and urban fantasy. And Tracy Richardson, who has 13 romance novels. So Colleen, you can take it from here.
okay. So welcome everybody. I just have a couple sort of housekeeping items before we start. So if you're comfortable, turn on your camera. We like to, see people, and it just, creates a better space for everybody. Totally understand if you're not comfortable. And also while the panel's going and people are talking, if you could turn off or mute your mics, that would be great, so we don't get any feedback. I'm going to try and keep us on track in the panel. So my apologies to any of the panelists if I have to cut you off, but we've got a lot of topics to cover and I'm going to try and stay on track so we don't go too far over. And also just finally, before we start, just wanted to, reiterate that this is a safe space. We're all different writers or readers at different stages of careers with different perspectives, and just respect each other for who they are and where they're coming from. So on that note, what I'd like to do is start it off by getting each of our panelists to give themselves a little bit of an introduction. And we might as well do it alphabetically, which I believe is Rosanna. Then, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Colleen, and thanks, Linda, for this opportunity to introduce myself and my books. Welcome to you all. My name is Rosanna Battigelli, and I'm a retired teacher. Teaching was my passion, as it was and is reading and writing. As I was teaching, I was also investing in my writing career. So over the years, I've been published in 19 anthologies. I have a novel published called La Brigantessa, which won an international award for historical fiction in 2019. I have 2 books with a children's publisher. This is one of them, and my Easter story is coming out in March. And I have 5 books with Harlequin. Here you only see 4 because the cover is not yet available for the 5th one, but three have been published. One is going to be released in March and the other one in July. And in my early years, I always dreamt of writing a Harlequin romance. So I'm just happy that I've been able to write in different genres, and I enjoy every single one of them.
Okay, thank you. So MJ, are you there? How is your connection working for you?
So far,
Okay,
I've switched out a couple times, but I'm here right now.
okay.
So yeah, I'm MJ Moores. I'm what I like to call a hybrid author. I have most of my novels published via the indie market, but my romantic suspense series is actually through Love Not Books. And that's a small publishing house based out of Goodwood, Ontario. So a nice little local press. Getting ready to launch my 3rd book through them. I have 14 books out right now across the spectrum. You mentioned earlier, sci-fi, fantasy, basically what brought me to the romance side is I always had an opportunity, or I've tried to integrate romance in everything that I write. True romance, HEA, not the love story. And it was interesting once I started really delving into what romance is. About 4 years ago, I joined the TRW, the Toronto Romance Writers, and I started to really dig deep into understanding the genre so that I knew what I was writing. And I was happy to find that I've been doing it right. So that's always nice. And so a lot of my books have an element, a thread, or subplot of romance.
Nice, thank you. I'll be interesting to hear your thoughts as the evening progresses on what true romance is, because I'm not entirely sure what that means, but we'll get to that. So Tracy, if you want to let us know a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm a retired, as of 5 years ago, daily newspaper journalist, which I did for about 30 years or almost 30 years. But I've been writing romance novels for 14 years now. They are lesbian romance novels, and my publisher is Bella Books in Florida. This is just my last book that came out a year ago, December. And I want to just sort of mention that, having been a journalist for many years, actually, I really found it goes well together with being a fiction writer, because it's like you get paid to talk to all kinds of people that you would never normally talk to, from, professional musicians, doctors, the prime minister. I mean, you get you just get this entree into this whole world that really has helped me with character development. I remember a time interviewing a heart surgeon, a heart specialist in London, Ontario, and so we're doing this very serious interview, and he gets a phone call from one of his kids, and so I'm listening to him. I'm right there in front of him, and he's talking to his kids, and he's telling them to take out the garbage. And it's just the kind of thing that makes you remember when you're writing characters that they're not just that one, they are not just their occupation, or they're regular people. And it's really important to get those elements into your story. So I have 13, did I mention I have 13 romance novels? I've been taking a bit of a break the last year. I wish I could blame it on the pandemic, my break from writing, but I don't know if it was burnout or I just needed a break. So I'm actually just starting another novel again, finally. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. That's great. I love the different ranges of experience we have on the panel, and so you all come from kind of different backgrounds. We've sort of got, the LGBTQ, we've got the historical stuff, and then we've got the sci-fi, fantasy, urban fantasy sort of. I guess MJ just writes everything, I guess. But okay, so we have a sort of a list of questions that we want to go through, and what we're going to do is we'll sort of start with one person and work their way through, and we'll take turns who gets to start. And we're very informal, so if you have something to add in between, don't feel free to jump in, and we'll have a conversation. So the first question is, why are romantic elements important to a story, and so what do they add? So we're not talking specifically about just a romance in particular, but just that sort of storyline within a larger context. So I guess Rosanna, if you want to start.
Sure. Well, romance is a part of life, and it's a big part of life for many people. It's part of the human condition, and romance enhances people's lives. It changes people's lives, and it's of great interest to people, whether they see it portrayed in a book or on film. in the news, in entertainment news. People like or love to read stories, books with romantic elements. And, you know, and they can choose stories at all levels of the spectrum of love, right? Love and romance. Readers want to be swept away by romance and, you know, get away from what's happening in the world sometimes, or problems in life. And romance provides an escape. You know, there's also an aspirational element to romance, you know, a fantasy, being swept away to romantic, beautiful locales and meeting someone of you know, that attracts you. And a romantic story can move the reader, right? It touches a good love story touches your heart, and people like happy endings, or many people love happy endings. So, you know, and you know, when you read a good book or see a good movie that's based on a good book, you know, with a love story that engages your emotions, it touches you and you remember it. So, I mean, it's no wonder that romance fiction is the most widely read fiction. And again, it encompasses many many genres. Even, you know, you see romance in historical fiction, you see romance in thrillers. So it's the romantic elements are enjoyed by many. And you know, it's really wonderful to be able to give that kind of experience to a reader, to have a happy ending, or two people coming together in a, you know, happy ever after.
Okay, MJ, do you want to add to that?
Well, Rosanna basically covered it, but you know, like I'm here championing her. Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, people love it, it's what we do. You know, no matter who we're attracted to, it says a lot about us as an individual, and to be able to include that in your writing and in the stories that you present creates a much more three-dimensional world and characters. And it gives another touching point for a reader to be able to connect to the story and the individuals that are being portrayed. So I would say, you know, what does it add? It's character development. It's an understanding of life in all its facets, instead of just being narrowly focused on one thing and having that drive your plot. Yeah, so basically it's interesting to see how the concept of love or romance or affection changes or manipulates and contorts the decision-making process of our characters.
I love that point, actually, the contorts, because it's so true. It just warps your whole perception of everything, doesn't it? Tracy.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything our speakers are saying. Yeah, I mean, love it's a major physical and emotional drive in human beings. It motivates us to do dramatic things. It causes chemical and hormonal changes in our bodies. We chase it in real life. We chase it in books and movies. If you look at, you know, the best-selling movies and books throughout recent history, I think you'll find strong romantic elements in those. So yeah, as MJ was just saying, that you know, the romantic elements in a story make it a human story that we can all relate to. It totally gives depth to the characters, motivates them, drives them into plot twists, can define them. Love certainly can change characters. To me, a book or a film without at least a bit of a romantic component feels like it's lacking something. You know, maybe that's just me. I don't know. What do you guys, do you agree with that? It's just, it's too one-dimensional if it doesn't have that human element of romance somewhere in there.
Rosanna or MJ, do you want to respond to that?
I agree, and with that, and because what readers seek in any book or they enjoy in a book are connections between people. And a romantic connection is very strong, and it reflects what the reader may have experienced in life or wants to experience in life. And, you know, readers enjoy anything from, you know, a touching romance to a steamy romance. There's all kinds of levels that you can enjoy. And it, you know, I mean, romance is practically in every genre, and probably, you know, can be found in every genre. Well, maybe not in children's fiction, but we're talking in adult fiction.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, but I would argue with you. I think there's love stories in children's literature as well. So
yes, I don't mean love. I like, you know, yes, love as a theme is certainly present in children's stories and children's fiction, but we're talking about you know, different kinds of romantic elements.
Right, that's very true, very true. Well, that is a perfect segue, actually, because our next question is, so love versus lust and the implications for the story. Like, how does that, well, I won't go on, I'll just let you guys answer that. And MJ, if you want to start on that.
Sure. I just in the broad sense, I would say both are vital. Lust is often a precursor to love, not always, but you know, it is one of the tropes, and you know, they both affect the choices that we make, like we were talking about earlier, and our character decisions. Often it's a trigger, you know, jealousy, these strong emotions that are pulled up and become challenges, whether it directly impacts the scope of the plot or not. It will impact the character, depending on if you're writing a romance, a full romance. I mentioned earlier a true romance. That means having a happily ever after or a happy for now at the end. Otherwise, what we would refer to elements of romance would be more of a love story if there was no happy ending or promise of happiness. So, I mean, and I think that it really depends on your market as to where you're going to go, whether you're focusing on love more than lust, or you have a healthy balance of the two, or an unhealthy balance, because that can, you know, there's so many things that can happen. But I actually write a lot of sweet, I like to call it sweet romance with a hint of spice. So my characters never engage in the sexual act on the page. It's always off screen, off page. And it's a lot of young adult fiction that I write. So it's the idea of love. You know, people may think that they're in love when really they're in lust. So it's that wonderful back and forth pull that you find in the discovery of, you know, what it is you're feeling. And it's wonderful to read that.
Yes. Yeah. And as you say, opens up so much opportunities for misunderstandings and for plot twists. And yes, absolutely. It gives you so much to work with as an author, I would imagine. Okay. So Tracy.
I probably don't have a whole lot to add to that. I mean, obviously lust can also be a very motivating force for people to behave a certain way, but it is more transitory than love. So, I mean, what is it that you want to accomplish with your characters? You know, lust certainly has a place in some storylines, but yeah, I'd say if you're going for love, I mean, there's going to be a lot more depth for your story and your characters than lust. And just the other point I would make is, if the romantic love part, if you haven't fleshed that out enough, it may come across as lust, which might not be what you're going for.
Right. And so when, Well, I have a question, but I'll wait. I'll wait till Rosanna jumps in on this before I ask the question.
Okay, well, I just want to add that, as I mentioned before, romance novels cover all levels across the spectrum of love, and certain series or lines are known for their level of spiciness, right? And readers have preferences, and they can choose to read series or authors who create stories and situations with a level of intimacy that they enjoy. And I'm quite happy with creating stories, sweet stories, romantic stories, love stories, for the Harlequin contemporary romance series, which focus on the characters' growing attraction for each other, which is not just physical, although they have a strong chemistry, but it's also emotional. It develops out of their awareness and understanding and empathy for the other's emotional backstory, and they somehow help each other come to new understanding, or help each other resolve certain issues that allow them to move forward and to help their relationship develop, and which makes the love story at the end very satisfying that they have been able to do that. So there can be sensual elements to the story, which because they are physically attracted to each other, but it's not described in an explicit way. So you can emphasize the romance and the love as opposed to the lust. I mean, there will be physical attraction, but it's connected to the emotional attraction and understanding of each other.
Interesting. I love when you're talking about the fact that they're connected. And so, question I had earlier, when I don't know, maybe, well, I guess Rosanna, you've written 5 books, and Tracy, you've written 13. And so, when you're starting out your book, are you conscious of the level of, whatever type of romance you're writing? And I know there's so many different kinds of, from hot to sweet, or whatever you want to call it. And so, when you start out, are you very conscious because of where you're going to go? Like, do you establish that at the beginning?
Well, I can speak to the fact that with the writing series, the contemporary romance in Harlequin, I'm very comfortable with the parameters I have to describe the developing love story of the two characters, the attraction, the passion, and certainly details of their growing attraction can be done, but there's a line, right, that you can go up to this line in developing the story. So you can certainly have the sensual aspect of their physical relationship and emotional relationship, but again, you stop at a certain point, and you engage the characters, and when the characters are engaged, the readers are engaged, right? So you use all the elements, which I think is we can talk about in the elements of creating romantic scenes and a romantic story. But yes, I know I'm comfortable with a certain level of sensuality with this particular series. And I enjoyed it when I was a teenager. I used to love reading Harlequin romances. And over 35 years ago, I wrote a Harlequin romance and started 2. And then years passed, and, I ended up getting them published, certain ones published after I retired. So I still enjoy reading them, and I enjoy writing at that particular level.
Yeah. So Tracy or MJ, do you want to add to that at all?
I'll jump in for a second and just because I write lesbian romance novels, there is a difference in terms of the sexual material, their explicitness, because for many, many decades and centuries, you know, literature written for gay people, you know, for a long time never included sex. It was fade to black, or
Mm.
you know, and oftentimes the main characters, one or both, would die at the end or be demonized in some way, so that it's not, you know, the norm or accepting, um, to show this material, to write this material. And so it's a bit of a, you know, it's a bit of a touchier point, I think, for readers of gay fiction. I think most of them want to see some sex in there, to sort of, so they can see themselves in there, right? So they can, so that their, you know, preference and existence and lifestyle is not shameful or anything like that. And I, at a book tour I was on with a couple of other lesbian authors, there were, I think we were doing readings, and there were maybe 40 women or so in the audience. And so someone just raised their hand and said, you know, how many people in the audience here want to see sex scenes in their lesbian romance novels? And out of those 40 people, all but about 4 put their hands up. And so I guess I just want to make the point that, you know, I am coming from a bit of a different place, where it is important to some people, to a lot of us, to actually have those scenes in a novel. So it's something I think about and sort of plot out before I start, like how much, where in the novel is it going to take place, and so forth. So that, I just wanted to mention that perspective as being a little bit different.
Mm. It's quite fascinating, actually, especially when you're talking about the historical context of it and where it's sort of that lesbian literature has come from, right? In terms of, and the function it serves. It's fascinating.
Hasn't it come a long way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, can't even imagine. MJ, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just to echo what Tracy was saying, you really need to understand your market when you're writing romance. So yes, when those of us who are used to writing it begin to develop a story idea, as Rosanna said as well, it's very clear what our parameters are for, you know, who we're trying to reach and what our scope is. I mean, if you're writing erotica, or if you're writing a romance with erotic scenes, which are two very different things, you need to know that in advance. And it makes a big difference as to how you plot out, you know, your pinch points and your highs and lows, and your overall arcs for character development and plot. So, and something to keep in mind too, no matter what the steamy level is, like Rosanna mentioned, it often comes down to intimacy. And the idea, like, you can create high tension between two characters without them having to be naked. But if they are naked, I mean, you have to consider then, all right, how does that suddenly change the dynamic? Is this a scene that I need to have up front that will then come again later to show growth in that moment? Is it something that needs to be led into gradually? You know, and so putting the forethought into those moments of intimacy, I think, is very important. It's something that I always look at. And I know, even if I don't write it down, I have it in the back of my head where those major points are, when and why they should be happening, so that there is that nice arc, you know. And especially I love in romance, you know, the black or the dark moment where you're just like, no, they're not gonna get together after all. And we're like, well, and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, thank God. So yeah, and having those moments of intimacy, whatever steam levelness, I think is crucial for having that happen.
Yes, and I do think that is something about romance, is that it is very, you know, you need to know your levels, right? Because your readers are very sophisticated and they know what they want. So All right, well, going on to the third question. I think Tracy, you're going to be first on this one. And we've kind of sort of talked about this, but sex too much or too little and where to draw the line. So I don't know if you have kind of covered this, but if you had anything to add, just go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I think we covered a fair bit of it, but, as we were saying that, readers are all over the map on this, and it's important to know your readers and what they want. To me, though, I mean, if I have sex scenes, which I do in my novels, and straight people read my novels too. Readers can, they can skip those scenes, right? If they want, they can skip those pages. But if it's not there, then it's harder for the reader to sort of, to me, conjure that up than to skip it. So, I figure they can skip over that. I mean, if you buy a lesbian romance novel, 9.5 times out of 10, there is going to be sex in there. So I don't think it's a big shock to readers when they come across it. But I just want to make the point, whether you choose to have sex scenes or where you put them or what you do with those scenes, it's really important to keep it authentic to your story and your characters. And keep your genre in mind too. So if you're writing a cozy mystery or a thriller or something, yeah, we want a romantic element, but we don't necessarily need sex in those. It might it might not wash very well with some readers.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, because I write thrillers. And so every time I go to a thriller conference, there's always this talk about, so where do you put the sex scene? If they're going 1,000,000 miles an hour, the whole book, just going from one sort of crisis to the next, they don't all of a sudden stop and just
it would seem really weird.
Yeah, it's a very different. I guess Rosanna, yeah.
Right. I just want to add to that. There can be intimacy in a tender scene, or a scene where one of the characters is showing vulnerability. So intimacy can happen at an emotional level, which may then lead to, physicality. And, as a writer of romance, I'm comfortable with the level, as I mentioned, of physicality in the contemporary romance series. The tension is there. I mean, the attraction between the characters and their passion is felt. And if you feel it as a writer, you know that your audience is going to feel it, right? And there is a lead up to their developing love story. But the details, those very, very intimate details, are not explicitly described. And which is perfect for some readers, and some may prefer a spicier account. And for that, they will delve into other series in whether it be in the Harlequin line or other publishers of romance. There's many writers, both from Harlequin and other publishers, that are on the New York Times bestseller list, and people have their favorites, and they're very loyal to their authors. And but like as was mentioned before, your particular level of sensuality and who you're writing for and what you enjoy writing. And I think that's important, because you have to enjoy what you write, and that enjoyment and that level of emotion is going to carry between your characters and also with your readers.
MJ, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. The only other thing I might add, just for clarification, with the idea of too much or too little, is actually something that I learned from Molly O'Keefe. And I've heard her say it a number of times in different webinars and in person at meetings. And she basically, and it's always stuck with me. She says, sex or intimacy should never be there just for the sake of being there. There needs to be a reason for it. That it should be integral to the plot in some way. So when I edit for other people, and we're looking at it, we're saying too much or too little from that side of things. I'll write up. I say, as we've been talking about, okay, who's your target audience? We go through the laundry list of things, and once we've got the scope, it's like, all right, this sex scene over here is a superfluous. You already cover what's happening here emotionally in the scene before, but the scene after takes it to the next step. So here it is more sex for the sake of sex. It's gratuitous as opposed to helping bring the plot along. And in other situations, it may be you get to the end of the novel. It could be a YA one, like what I write, and there haven't been enough of those moments of connection where it doesn't even have to be the almost kiss. It could be the fingers nearly touching or just brushing against each other when they get close. And it's those moments where you remember, theoretically, you would remember having experienced that with somebody that you had an opportunity to, be close to, but know that it wasn't at the stage yet where you could actually hold their hand, or, and it's that moment of anticipation, really, that creates that tension, as opposed to whether it's spicy or not.
Fascinating. Yeah. This is one thing I love about romance is it's a very complex, like there's so much going on. And we have a question now later that sort of talks about subtext in a scene, which you've sort of alluded to here, but sure, we'll talk about that more when we get there. But yeah, it's the fact that so I guess my question is sort of just a short question is then, so if you're running something that's more erotica, then the sex scenes become more gratuitous. Is that what you're saying? Simply because they have to be in there, kind of thing?
From my understanding, I don't write erotica, and Tracy might be able. I'm not saying she writes erotica either, but she's familiar with including sex scenes as opposed to Rosanna and I. And but from what I have learned over the last 4 years, specifically studying romance, it's that you have a lot more room to play when you write erotica. And so it's not necessarily that a particular sex scene is gratuitous for the sake of being gratuitous. It's there because the reader is A, looking for it, and B, it is informing. It's still informing what's going on. It's just doing it through the language of the body as opposed to through speaking.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so moving on to our next question. We're going to look a little bit about point of view in terms of romance and points of view. And I guess Rosanna can start, but our question is showing romance through different points of view. What works, what doesn't work? Does it always have to be first person? Can it be third person? So go ahead, Rosanna.
Okay, thank you. I love the fact that I can create a story displaying both points of view, the hero and the heroine, because this way the reader gets to know each character fully, their past, their challenges, their fears, their hopes, and how they feel about each other, what they want to reveal, what they don't want to reveal, and or share about themselves. And by including each point of view, the reader is not left out of the equation, because they don't see it from just one perspective. They get both perspectives. So the heroine might be keeping something from the hero, but the reader is aware of that. And it just provides more of a balance. So through each of the perspectives, the reader witnesses what's going on, how things are developing, how they are meant to be together. So the reader gets a chance to root for both characters in the story, because the reader has access to the characters' thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, their growing passion, the misunderstandings that each have, but in the back of the reader's mind, they know it's going to be resolved, right? And they're eventually going to reveal their love and commitment. So with having different points of views, there's a balance in the story, and the reader gets the whole picture and not just the perspective of one character.
And I imagine you can sort of play back and forth, as you were saying, between the two, right? And revealing information in one and changing, and I guess it's sort of, and highlighting misunderstandings as well, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Sorry, I'm losing track of my alphabet here for a second. MJ, you're next.
I thought it was Tracy next, but I don't mind. So for me, when I write my romantic suspense, because it has to be equal parts romance and suspense, yes, the genre dictates that I should have 2 points of view between the two people who are going to develop feelings for each other. And that, as Rosanna said, is very important because of that balance and going back and forth. But specifically, how you can tell which point of view to do a scene from is by figuring out who has the most to lose, who has who's risking the most in that scene, and then put the scene from that person's perspective so that you get the greater push for tension and the ability then to draw your reader in and have them on the edge of their seat. I also, however, as we talked earlier, I write science fiction and fantasy, and often in the different series I have, book one is from the single main character's perspective. Later books, I start branching into other points of view, but it's interesting. For some reason, I always start with the one character. We discover their world, and then we branch out in the other books. And so to have only one point of view and to be dealing with a subplot of a romantic nature, you still need to keep in mind different ways of being able to show how the other character is feeling, even though you're not inside their head. And it's all about those little hints and tricks, like leaving little breadcrumbs along the way for the way they respond, react, hesitate before they say something. There are all sorts of I wouldn't say gimmicks, but things that we do naturally as human beings that help get across the fact that we're nervous, we're excited or shy, and we incorporate that in our writing anyway to begin with. So when it comes down to being able to show that other character's romantic response or how they're feeling, you really need to rely heavily on those types of cues and clues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. Like, I mean, all writers sort of rely on that kind of thing, but I imagine in the romance, it's even more critical because the emotions are stronger potentially. Well, I mean, yeah, interesting. Yeah. A question just about the suspense and romance. So do you write suspense with romantic elements, or do you write romance suspense? You know what I'm asking you?
Yeah, I tend to write the suspense plot first in my mind.
Yeah.
And then I consider, okay, now how can I adequately weave in the romance to properly balance this out? Because I'm usually a little lacking on that side. I write adventure, which is why I write so many different genres. For me, it's about the internal growth as well as the external journey. Right. And whether that's love or Indiana Jones type, trekking through jungles, that's what I focus on is that active action plot. Mm-hmm. But like I say, it's always integrated, always natural, that the romance side of things is a part of it. It's just I have to be very aware of how much more is necessary for sustaining that romantic suspense line.
Right. Tracy, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I like the way MJ and Rosanna kind of tee things up here, because I don't have a lot I need to add. I write also in the third person POV with two main characters. But I would just add that, when you're plotting out your novel, when you're plotting out your sex scenes, you have to think about things like, okay, if the scene starts from one person's POV, do I switch halfway through the scene so we can get the other person's take on how things are going with the sex? Or do you wait and then the next sex scene is from the other character's point of view? It's all these little things that go into the soup that it almost sounds like it's not very fun writing sex scenes and romance stories. It is, it's a blast, but I think it was Rosanna that talked about a balance is very key here. So just keep in mind with your characters with sex scenes that you shouldn't have them every sex scene just from one character's point of view if you have two main characters. And like they were both pointing out, each character's viewpoint, their feelings, their experience is going to be maybe quite different than the other characters.
Yeah.
That's all I would want to add to that.
Well, it's interesting because I never would have thought to change points of view in the middle of a sex scene, but obviously you do that, do you?
If it's a long scene, you certainly can do that. I have done that where I mean it has to suit the mood though. I mean, you can't have a 10-page sex scene just so you can get the two characters points of view in, so to me there's nothing wrong with having the next one from the other person's point of view.
Right. Just as a curiosity, do you have a typical number of pages that your sex scenes like for length?
I don't start out with that intention because I'd like to sort of see where it goes. But one thing I did for the first time ever in my novels was this last one. The first, I don't know, maybe third or a quarter of the book is the two characters. They don't know each other in real, like for real, who they actually are, but they arrange to meet in a hotel every Thursday to have sex because they're both busy professionals. They don't want relationships. And so it has to start out with sex because that's the whole reason that these two people are coming together. And then it segues into their real worlds end up colliding and in a not so happy way. And so that ends the sex for quite a while. And then, I go back and I rebuild a romance, a loving relationship between the two. So there's all sorts of things you can do with a sex scene that you can build your whole plot from an initial meeting for sex, right?
Yeah. Fascinating. That's what I love about writing. It's just so complex and intricate and ever changing. And it's just, yeah. So, okay, now I can't even remember. Has everybody talked on this question? They have, right? Because you were last, right? Okay. So, so our next question, and I guess this is MJ who will start on this, is what are the different approaches for writing love scenes? So where do you, starting points, I guess, and MJ?
Well, yeah, I always consider what is unique to that character, first and foremost. What turns them on? What makes them smile? What gives them goosebumps? As I mentioned earlier, for me and possibly even Rosanna, it's the little things because we write sweeter. And it's, the warm breath on skin or those almost touches, which could be considered almost the foreplay to the kiss down the road, or, the moment of revelation emotionally. And then that's really it, is adding emotion to the physical, and not just doing a play-by-play like you would for a hockey tournament or something. And here she goes, and moving in with the hand over here, this and this and that, and you think you're ramping up the tension and and everything, but really, if emotion isn't involved in the moment, and an honesty of that emotion, not necessarily the character being honest with himself, but with them in the moment expressing what they think they're feeling, that is what really pulls the intimacy of a scene when I'm writing.
Okay, Tracy.
Yeah, like I think probably most of us would agree that sex is better when there's emotion, right? So yeah, you've got to get those feelings in there. It, as MJ said, like whatever you do, do not make it seem like you're reading a manual, a how-to manual. I remember a friend gave me a manuscript to read once, and I was just flabbergasted at how bad the sex scene was, because it was like with my first finger and my third finger, and like it was like, oh my God, do not do that. Do not do that. How explicit you want to get is really up to you, as long as you're keeping on track with your characters. This is a true story. A friend of mine was rejoining the dating scene, and she went out on a sort of blind date with someone that I guess it was through a dating site or something. So they agree to meet. They meet at a restaurant. First thing out of the other woman's mouth was, "So I've decided I'm never having sex again, just so you know." This is true. First date. I've decided I'm just never having sex again. So, I mean, I think that's a great opening line, like to start a writing prompt or something, right? But so you can't have in the next chapter, all of a sudden the person who's never having sex again is, wildly having sex, and just keep it authentic, and use your sex scenes to advance the plot. I mean, everything you do, every scene should be advancing your plot, and it should also be developing your characters. So yeah, sex is a great thing to include in a romance novel, but it still has to drive the romance. So it doesn't have to be the very end. Like I've seen it many times where the author saves the sex scene until the very end, when it's clear that the characters are together forever, happily ever after. Then they can have sex. So you can do it that way as well. But if you have it earlier, you still have to be advancing the romantic relationship. The attraction still, just because they've had sex doesn't mean now that, okay, that's the end of the road, that's the end of the romance. You've still got to keep having the sexual tension and all those other elements. So yeah, I would just reiterate the whole, make sure there's feeling, there's emotion in those scenes.
Yeah, I do like your point about the fact that every scene, even if it is a love scene or a sex scene, still has to advance the plot, right? You just can't stick it in there. It's got to have a reason, right? Rosanna, did you want to add anything?
Yes, for writing love scenes, I find that you have to create an enhanced, a heightened emotional setting and physical setting. So, for example, you're going to take your characters and put them in a place that enhances the mood. Maybe they're stuck in a lovely cottage. during a winter storm. You can have elements of nature be in synchronicity, in sync with their heightened emotions. For example, in my first romance, and this is the cover of the UK edition, the Mills and Boon edition. The characters, Cassin and Justine, go for a swim in the bay, in Georgian Bay, which is near Perry, in a cottage setting near Parry Sound, Ontario. And it's a sultry summer night, and when they're swimming, all the elements of nature come into place: the feel of the water, the heat of the summer night, the electricity in the air, because you can feel that there is a storm that is brewing, and the electricity and the passion is between them is imminent and palpable. It's dusk, and you hear the loon call. And if any of you have ever heard the haunting call of a loon, it just adds to the mood. And it's the sky is deepening with beautiful colors. So it's a visual thing. It's the hearing the sounds of the waves. It's the electricity in the air. And, you bring all the elements of nature into play. And so in this particular scene, lightning starts, lightning flashes across the sky, and they come out of the water. And just as they're heading to the cottage, there's a downpour and they get drenched. They reach the cottage, and Cassin has to go and get some towels, and then you add the tactile element, that they are in a heightened state of excitement and electricity, and they help each other get, they dry each other, and you just add all these elements that make the scene very have a lot of sexual tension without being explicit, but you're engaging the senses, right? So if you want to write a sensual scene, then the key word is senses. You utilize the different senses, and not only what they feel, but the sensory nature around them. So you show how they're acting and reacting to each other and to their environment, and I find that adds to the scene, the love scene, or the sensual scene. And the other thing too is it can also be a comedic scene that adds to the growing attraction between them. So I've included scenes where there's humor, and it's just fun to create these scenes where that advance, there's the story, help develop their growing attraction and emotional understanding, and you do it in ways that engage the senses.
Yeah, it's what I find fascinating is listening to all of you talk about, you writing your scenes and the decisions you're making, is how much you all really enjoy writing romance, and just playing with the different elements and seeing how they fit. And it's quite it's quite inspiring to listen to, actually. And so we have a sort of a final question. And so when I used to be part of the writers community of Simcoe County, and we had a woman come in there one time, and I can't remember her name at the moment, but she essentially wrote erotica, but it was actually about politics. So she had some very significant subtext sort of beneath what, the erotica and the sexual element of the story. So I'm wondering, like, depending, you all write different kinds of romances, but so how much subtext is there going on in your sex scenes? And I don't remember who's starting, so I think it's actually Tracy, maybe? Yes. Okay.
I just going to backtrack for 1 second to what Rosanna, when she was describing mood, and to me it's almost like, as a writer, you're seducing the reader too. Like you want to get them, the reader, into the mood is part of the reason for that whole, build up and setting the mood is because we all want our reader to feel like this is happening to them, or they're in the novel. So think of it as, you're trying to seduce your reader almost. Okay, but subtext, yeah, I mean, geez, I like to, I have a real thing where I character development like is really big to me. Um, so really the romance is, I mean, it is a romance novel that I write and there's sex in there, but really it's about the characters and what's happening to them and how they're living their lives. And um, it's not just about, meeting someone and falling in love, but I mean, I've written one of my novels was the character was running for she was running for president of the United States, and I've written other novels set in war theaters, and so there's war going around, but there's still there's still the romance. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm getting at what you were asking, but if I'm not, just
No,
give me a
no,
nudge.
that's fine. It's just, it's sort of wondering about when you're actually writing the scene. I mean, you probably have to sort of keep the two elements sort of in your mind at the same time and balance them out. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Boy, it's easy to get carried away though. Sometimes as a writer, you get writing not just a sex scene or romance scene, but I'm sure MJ with your sci-fi too. You can easily get off on a little tangent because you're having so much fun doing it, and you hope your editor is would maybe reel you in, but um I mean, if we've all read novels where something just went on and on and on, way too long. So, and I like to say, and this goes for sex scenes, romance, love scenes, whatever you want to call them, but a scene always has to serve a purpose. You, as the author, you need to know what that purpose is. And when your scene accomplishes that purpose that you've intended, get out of the scene. That's the way I feel about it. Don't protract it. Your reader will be bored. Just get in there, do your scene, accomplish what you need to accomplish for the characters or the plot, and and get back out.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting that, you would think that a love scene or a sex scene would be different, but it's not. I guess it has to follow the same rules. Once you've made your point or accomplished what you need to, then that's it. You're done. There's nothing, no
Yeah,
gratuitous sex, I guess.
yeah, exactly. Unless you're writing erotica.
Right,
Um,
right, right. Yeah. Um, Rosanna.
I think by using subtext, like the writer is conveying communication, but in ways that in other ways, you know, for example, relaying emotions in a nonverbal way, giving descriptions of facial expressions or body language, little quirks that a fluttering of an eye that might show the character's nervousness or excitement or emotion, whatever emotion that character is feeling. So it's using different nonverbal cues and clues, and that what you're doing too is you're creating symbols that the reader can associate with the character. For example, a particular nervous habit that he or she might have to indicate a specific emotion. So it's just different ways. You're not always going to express yourself verbally, but also through different actions and nonverbal cues.
Right. Did you have anything you want to add, MJ?
Not a whole lot. I don't tend to do a lot of subtext that's not related to the actual moment of intimacy. I kind of tend to leave that for the action side of the plot, just a personal preference. But in my steampunk series that I'm writing, the character sort of straddles the upper and lower class, worlds back in the Victorian era, and she's having to carve sort of a path of her own. And it's every time she gets close to somebody, or close to being, or thinking of being intimate in some way, the voice in her head is her mother, who had to basically prostitute herself to be able to allow the two of them to survive, because she was gave birth to a bastard child, and so she was disowned by her family. And that, just having that in the back of her head in all those moments where she could have kissed somebody, she might have done something or said something, and knowing that her mother is there reminding her constantly, don't do that, I did that, look where it got me. it creates this barrier and tension that it's like, okay, well, is she going to be able to get past this eventually? How far does she go to toe the line? If she goes over the line, what's that going to do to her? And bringing those questions into the mind of the reader in those moments of intimacy, that I will do.
Yeah, interesting. That sounds like a fascinating book, actually. I'd like to read that. Okay, well, that's sort of comes to the end of our official sort of questions for the night. And I just wanted to open it up for, if anybody in our audience wanted to ask any questions, you can just mute your mic and fire away.
There's always someone who has to start us off. So I'll do it. And then someone, think of your questions, guys. So my question is, what words are like absolutely no-nos for a sex scene? Like, what are the worst words, period?
Anybody can respond to that, whoever, any of the three of you, whoever.
I don't use words, for body parts or what have you that could be offensive. I know that maybe sounds a little odd when you're writing an explicit sex scene. You're worried about something offending someone, So I don't know what would be the worst thing you could say. I know my publisher, for instance, they have a thing where they, if you're writing a romance novel for them, you can't have, there's certain things that are forbidden, right? You can't have an incest storyline. Adultery is iffy and not encouraged. So if you're writing that or someone's having an affair, they're not saying you can't do it, but they don't encourage you to have that as your, happily ever after sort of thing. Because I guess some people just, they just won't read that sort of a novel. But I can't think of a word that would, I don't know. I mean, I try to be tasteful, I guess would be the thing.
And I think it depends on the series that you're writing for, or the particular, book that you want to write. And, if you do include a word that doesn't really suit that particular series, I'm sure the editor would say something. But I think you kind of know, because anyway, you read the books that you like to write, and so you you have an idea of what is acceptable and what is appropriate for that particular series.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, wouldn't that sort of depend on your audience and your genre? Because
Yes.
I mean, I write gay romance, so I know that depending on what kind of book I'm writing and whether or not it's kind of like more of a sweet kind of story that I'm writing, the words I use to describe a sex scene or something are going to be completely different than if I'm writing something that's a little more hard hitting. You know what I mean? So I think, I mean, I've never, I mean, I guess it's just me personally. I've never written a sex scene where my editor came back to me and said, oh no, you can't use that word in it. You know what I mean? Or, but I have had them come back and say, well, would this character really be using that kind of language? Because he doesn't seem like the kind of character who would. So I think it kind of comes down to your characterization and your who you're writing for, like what your audience would be expecting, wouldn't it?
Totally. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme sort of tonight in terms of, it's all about the characters, right? You can't just go off and do stuff that the character wouldn't normally do. Yeah, it's true to all fiction, right? It's ultimately about your characters and what they would or wouldn't do. Anybody else have another question?
I have one. Hi, I'm Esther. I've been to the last couple of these sessions and I love them. Thank you all for doing this. It makes me very happy. Sorry, I'm always a bit late and flipping cameras and things, just the nature of my life. But my question is, so I'm in the process of starting my second draft of what's basically is a future fiction action adventure. And there were two characters who I thought were going to potentially develop a romance, which turned out in the second half of the book, they're actually related. Not really a Luke Leia thing, but as soon as that happened, I'm like, oh no, I've just done that. But the rest of my book, there's lots of bits of flirtation, but no actual romance, and nothing actually comes to fruition. It's really focused, it's really plot driven, really like what happens next, what happens next, what happens next. And the main characters are in jeopardy, right? Pretty much right from beginning until they find safety at the end. So there's really there's no time for kissing. But it makes me wonder when I finished it, I'm like, oh my God, that's right. I had this little romantic plot, sort of super subplot in there, and it just got totally hoodwinked by the fact that they found out that they're related. And all the warm feelings they had for each other turned out to be sibling-like. And now I'm kind of at a bit of a loss. And it was interesting at the beginning of this session, it was kind of, it's like every good book has some romance in it. And mine doesn't. And it makes me feel a little like, what have I done wrong? I know I'll survive and the book will survive, and maybe in the second draft the romance will sneak back in. But what do you guys think? Like, do you, clearly if you write already with a romantic flair or a romance in mind, you're going to put that first and foremost, but do you find yourself kind of trying to push it to get the romance in? Or does it just happen because that's the way you write? Or is that like a particular focus? How does the romance develop out of what you are writing?
For me, it's integral. I'm a hopeless romantic, so it comes naturally, so to speak. But as for your book, Esther, it sounds like you have romantic elements in it. It's just it doesn't go the way you expect it to. That's all. And it's not that love isn't present. And I think that's what we're basically trying to say, is that we can't deny that love exists in the middle of a thriller. It'll just manifest in a different way. So there's nothing wrong with you, baby.
I'll just add that if you're writing for a specific romance publisher, then you know that the storyline will definitely have elements of romance all the way through, especially if it's a series that ends with happy ever after. So you're going to include that, but again, it develops gradually through the throughout the book. And I can't remember where I originally heard this, but it's like when you give your readers a treat, you're not going to give them a platter filled with everything all at once. You're going to, you know, give them some lovely hors d'oeuvres, and then you're going to give them the if you're in Italy, the primo piatto, and then the secondo piatto, and a glass of wine, bicchiere di vino. So it's going to be a gradual giving to the, not only to the characters, but to your readers, so that they can savor the developing romance and feel all the different emotions in the story as it develops, you know, because I think if you give everything at once, ultimately it won't be as satisfying as if you tantalize your characters and your readers along the way. So you know, writing for a romance line, there has to be romance in there. Writing a thriller, there may or may not be. It might be action packed, and there may be some elements to it. There may be some, you know, friction between characters, some sexual tension, but there might not be an actual romance that is developed, right? There could be some physicality, but not a love story. So it depends, and it depends on what you're writing.
And I would say too, for a thriller or mystery or what have you, is there maybe a little bit of backstory with a character that you can introduce? You know, maybe this character had a past romantic relationship with someone who pops up elsewhere in the book, or maybe towards the end when you've solved all the mysteries and you're wrapping everything up, maybe you can hint at an attraction between your character and someone else who comes along, and sort of leave it as a teaser at the end of the book that maybe they are going to get together. Or, you know, I think you can still find a way to have romantic elements without that being a big driver of your book, but just try to think about different ways that you could introduce another character to your novel, to ramp up a bit of interest from another character, or like I say, some backstory, something like that.
Thank you, everyone. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it almost sounds to me like you've got the Luke and Princess Leia thing going on there.
Definitely.
If it worked for Star Wars.
Yeah. Fortunately, they're the same father, and yeah, it's enough different that people might chuckle over it, but they won't. Oh, you just did that. It's just different enough.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
If I may, I'm curious to know what for Rosanna and Tracy, who your favorite couple is that you've ever written and why. Oh, can't hear you, Rosanna.
That is such a hard question, MJ. I really love all of my couples. I really do. And I really enjoyed writing their emotional backstories. And that's what I love about writing for this particular series. They each have something that they've had to surmount in their lives, a challenge, you know, and it's just I just love the way they come together. So I can't say I have a favorite. I love them all.
I agree with that. You know, we invest months or years in a certain character, or in the two characters that we're writing for a novel. And so, yeah, you really get emotionally invested in them. But for me, you know what? When it's time to move on, you move on, right? You can't dwell on them, you know, forever. It's on to the next couple. the next book. There's lots of love out there to go around, right?
And you know, as a writer, you know, for romance, you have to love being a matchmaker, right? So I've enjoyed creating a story where these characters get together and just, you know, resolve their issues and then move towards a happy ever after. So it's really, really satisfying to do that, and, you know, and to try to do that in real life too with friends.
That was going to be my question, whether or not you guys are all matchmakers in real life too.
Not me.
Well, I did have a question in terms of a lot of what you're talking about in terms of developing a romantic relationship is very similar to when you're sort of, you know, developing a platonic relationship between the characters in your book as well. So can any of you sort of speak to the difference between that? Like what they are so similar. And I'm curious if you have an awareness of what the difference is between that.
That's a good point, Colleen. It's like if you were writing a police procedural or a mystery where, you know, you've got two, let's say, you know, two cops thrown together as a partnership. And so, yeah, you know, it's like a marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, same idea. Like you've got to go through all the things, you know, things that piss each other off and the things that they bond over as well. So yeah, you can certainly take the things you've learned from writing a romance and put it into that kind of a novel, and vice versa too. If you haven't written a primarily romantic novel, but you've written suspense, mystery, these other things, you know, give it a try, even if it's a short story. Just have some fun with it. Don't be afraid. I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, I can't write a sex scene. I just don't know what to do. It's going to look awful. It's going to, you know, just, you don't have to show it to your mom or anybody, you know, just don't be afraid of it. It's, just have fun with it.
For me, I think the defining difference is you don't have sort of the next level emotional connection. You know, it's the platonic relationship stays at one level, and that you don't have those moments, those tingly moments, or the sparks that sort of drive you toward that next level. Um, and so as long as you're aware, like if you want to make sure it remains platonic, that you think of, like, if you have a sibling, like how you would react to that sibling, or a best friend, you know, either, you know, that you've never had romantic feelings for before, but you just know that the two of you have always fit well, and try and focus on the differences between, okay, well, I know this represents the love side of things and lust, and taking it to that level, and over here it really only just goes so far, and so where is that point? And it's kind of, it's almost natural, because when I'm writing for romance, it's I'm searching for those special moments that take it to the next level. But when I'm just writing friends, it's the easy camaraderie. You know, the tension is different, and in the situations that are going on, you're removing that one element, and it makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's a great answer, actually. The tension is very different, right? Because it's not going to necessarily the same kind of destination, right? Yes, great answer. So we have probably time for one more question if anybody has anything they want to ask.
I have a question about erotica. I've published a whole whack of YA and children's. I have 2 completed unpublished romance novels. I've published little bits of short erotica, but I have something that wants to be longer. And it's literally off the wall in that one of the characters has escaped from the painting and engaged with with the the main character. Now, I am easily into the point of view of the present day narrator. I am having trouble getting into the point of view of the woman who was painted into this picture in France about 200 years earlier. And is it important that with erotica, this thing wants to go, but it's stuck? Is it important to be in both people's point of view?
I would say for erotica, no, not necessarily, because you're not going to have the same depth of emotion and intimacy as you do with a romantic falling in love type story.
Uh-huh.
So no, I would say no. I'm find that interesting, your idea that paranormal stuff. Hey, it's
Yeah.
kind of cool actually.
It just started.
But
Being erotica.
when you told us about that, the woman from a painting comes alive, from 200 years ago comes alive. To me, my romance writer brain thinks, oh no, that's not erotica, that's a romance novel, right? Let's see what you can do with that as a romance. I mean, I toyed with a time travel. I only wrote a few chapters. I didn't carry on with it, but where yes, a guy travels back in time and he meets a woman who's been accused of murdering her husband from, I don't know, I can't remember how many years he travels into the past with this, but it's fascinating stuff. You could see what you can do with it as trying to develop a relationship between two people from a different time and figure out how can you actually make them stay together. Not in a painting, or maybe the other character ends up in the painting and that's the end of the story too.
Oh, the abusive husband's going to go into the painting. But it's the logistics of how many points of view do I need to be in to carry this out, because it's stuck when I tried to get into Genevieve's.
Well, fool around with it. Try the 2 points of view, or not. Try one and see how it's working out. It depends. Like, is this a short story or a novel length?
I think it might be a novella, but it can't be a short story because it'll be too long. Right.
So your main point of view would be which character? The one from the painting or the one in
present day character, because I can identify with that one.
Yeah, but it would actually be really interesting to have the other character, their point of view, like from 200 years ago, I think you said. Now they've suddenly come out of this painting. Oh my God, look at this world I've arrived in.
Well, that's where she is right now. She's put on the other woman's clothes and she's toddling around downtown Regina or wherever. And I'm just at loss. So I don't know if I should listen to her or not.
Allison, have you done any research into the time period where she's from?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Because honestly, I find that sometimes just allowing myself to go down that rabbit hole and poke around a little bit, whether it's in a library book or something online, just kind of nosing around, saying, well, what were women like, and why would somebody be painted in the first place? What was her pose? Was it more revealing? Was it more covered up?
Very revealing.
Right. So then you've got to say, okay, now what type of woman has herself painted that way? And then you start digging down that rabbit hole so that when you bring her into the present, you're familiar with what's already the way she ticks. So
Uh-huh.
it's easier then to figure out how she reacts to the world around her.
Okay, that's excellent points. Thank you.
Yeah, those are fantastic ideas from both of you in terms of, and I love the premise of that story. You absolutely have to pursue this because it's a fantastic premise.
I bet some beta readers love it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I can see why.
Yeah, actually, as a portrait artist, I love the concept. You know,
Right.
how does her soul get trapped in the painting? Because it's got to be something a little soulful in there that makes her a person, not
Yeah,
just
yeah.
not just a picture of a person. And what has she been sitting there stuck at? You know, stuck on this
Yes.
out at? So she's like the walls that are watching and listening, right?
Oh
You
yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
a boatload of fun with that. You could actually do a bit of research here and there, and then do a pile of free writes on what you
Yeah,
think
yeah.
her POV is, you know, and just and then figure out who she is that way.
Mhm.
Okay.
If I could add something, Allison, is in writing my historical novel, I had 6 point of view characters, and 5 of them being male, and one of them being a young peasant woman in 19th century southern Italy, one being the priest in the community, another being a colonel, another being an outlaw, a brigand, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to allow myself to get into each character to the point where, you know, each character could stand on his or her own and be recognizable for their different personalities and traits. And in doing that, I had to, I did a lot of research in, you know, of the era, of the women of the time, of the outlaw situation, the colonel, you know, in charge of the law in the area, and I had to write with thinking about, you know, I had to kind of forget that I was who I was and put myself into that particular character. So when I was, you know, in the head of the priest, I had to think about what he would say, how he would react, how he would interact with other characters. And I had to do that for each person. Now I'm going to recommend an excellent book on creating character that I used when I was doing my research, a book by Elizabeth George, who now if I can remember the title, I think it might be Right Away, but I'll double check that. But anyway, she wrote an excellent book about character development, and I have many more. Like I have a list of books, but that was one book that really helped me in character development. And in reading books like that, you might get a clearer idea of how to go about creating that particular character.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, wonderful. Those are all great suggestions. You just had, you know, little beta group give you a whole
Yeah.
fantastic. So I think we are sort of out of time for our panel, but I want to thank all our panelists for coming. That was absolutely fantastic. You have great depth of knowledge on this subject, and it was absolutely fantastic. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over to Linda now, and you can take it from here.
Thank you,
All
folks.
right.
I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for coming, Tracy.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye, Tracy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna say good evening as well. I have a young man, 9 years old. We have our nightly reading and, you know, bedtime routine to do. So it was lovely. Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. I hope to be able to come back again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Thanks, MJ.
I mean,
Thank
that's too bad. We're doing an open mic now, so
you.
yeah. So word uppers, now is your chance to show us what you've got. If you have anything you'd like to read, who's interested? Just trying to see. I see some chats here. So, has anyone got any of their own work to read? I know we just lost Frank. He usually sings us a song, but
Yeah.
Well, I could read some excerpts of one of my books.
Is it?
If nobody else is reading.
As long as it's a romance book, just to stay in theme. Nice.
But does anybody else want to read?
No, go ahead, Rosanna. We've got time for more than one person. So.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Let me just. Justine couldn't quite believe what was happening. Earlier, she had decided to show Casson that she was interested. Now here she was, following this gorgeous man to a private beach where they would be sharing wine and cheese on the most sultry night of the summer. She shivered in anticipation, the wine in her system already starting to loosen her up. They sat side by side in the Muskoka chairs, nibbling on cheese and crackers and cooling themselves with wine. There was no breeze whatsoever, and the surface of the bay was mirror still. In minutes, it would be dusk, and Justine's pulse quickened at the thought of being with Casson in the darkness. The sky was a magnificent palette in the twilight, with streaks of vermilion, orange, magenta, and gold. She turned to Casson, exclaiming at the beauty of it, and met his intense gaze. He held out his glass. "Here's to another beauty," he said huskily, and leaned over so that his face was close to hers. Their glasses clinked, but neither of them drank. Casson moved closer, and with the pulsating in her chest that spread down her body, Justine felt herself tilting her face so his lips could meet hers. When they made contact, ever so lightly, Justine closed her eyes with the wonder of it. And when Casson's lips pressed against hers and then moved over her bottom lip, she thought her limbs would melt. She let out a small gasp, giving Casson the opportunity to deepen the kiss. She was sure her heart would explode as she reciprocated, tasting the wine on his tongue. Justine lost all sense of time and space, and when he finally released her, the glorious colors of the sky had faded to dusky gray and indigo. He took her hand and helped her stand up. Pulling her to him, he lifted his hands to cup the back of her head and kissed her again. And I'm going to skip one part. "Let's go for a dip," he said, his breath ragged. And then I'm going to continue. I don't want to give it all away. Anyway, here we go. Somewhere in the distance, a loon gave its haunting call, and as they splashed their way into the still but bracingly cold depths of the bay, with Luna following, Luna is Casson's dog, Justine felt freer than she had ever felt in her life. After the initial shock of the water on their heated skin, they automatically came together. The water was up to Justine's chest. Justine tilted her head back as Casson's lips traced a path up her neck to her mouth. He pulled her in even closer, and their bodies fit together in a way that sent a series of jolts through her. And then I continue, but then I move to Casson's point of view. Casson was in another world with Justine pressed against him in the water, his senses filled with the sight and feel of her. He wanted to stroke every part of her with his hands and his lips, to make her gasp with pleasure. She looked like a sea nymph with those smoldering blue eyes and silky skin. She was looking up at him now, their bodies locked together, their arms encircling each other. The dark sky was suddenly lit up with a flash of lightning, and the effect was surreal, the light reflecting in each other's eyes. Luna started barking. She had already dashed out of the water after a quick dip and had been waiting for them on the beach, but now she was running about in a panic from the electricity in the air. When the rolls of thunder followed, she started yelping even more and ran frantically in and out of the water. The rain started seconds later. Casson took Justine's hand, and by the time they got out of the water and onto the beach, the rain was pelting down on them. It was warm rain, but heavy, falling down in sheets. They quickly gathered their clothes and the items they had left by the Muskoka chairs and table and dashed to the cottage. Once inside, they stood in the entrance, the rain dripping off their bodies onto the linoleum floor. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Wonderful.
Nice. Left a lot out though. You have to get the book, I guess. Does anybody else have anything to read? It doesn't have to be romantic. I know it's almost Valentine's Day, but no takers. I have a poem that I wrote yesterday, actually, that is not romantic, even in the slightest little bit. So maybe I'll read that. It should be fairly short. It's called In the Wash. A naked beast sitting in a dark room alone. The light of his computer screen fills up his brain and shuts out his soul. What lie shall I spin this supercilious night? He says to the hollow walls, no more hollow than his heart. Then tap, tap, tappity tap on his plastic keys, cryptic words with no meaning, yet with grand implication. I always knew I'd change the world. His maniacal laugh is heard by no one. This is how I imagine the ensorcelled QAnon truth. He is probably one divisible by 3 or 4. Infernal internet forum owning, operating, chaos craving, fiendish human beasts, many masters of tech, gurus of deceit, paid in large by cold cash and by the blood of 5, maybe more, who died for their nation, like a baby who got lost in the filthy family tub. These things will all come out in the wash.
Very nice.
Nice, happy poem.
Well, if nobody else has anything, I have 2 pages I can read. That's from my book, The Gatherer. And it's it's not really a sex scene, but you'll see. So this is basically, there's 2 people in a lab, Storm and Daniel, and they've been running some experiments. Daniel had hated the fame and the people who had wanted to know him when they had passed over him before. Professors who suddenly had projects they wanted to collaborate on, posting photos of them together on social media. He had withdrawn into his brand new lab where he ran test after test, failing to see that their work was done. Why don't we go for a walk? He'd had the greasy, gaunt look he got when he'd been in the lab too long, and Storm had hoped a walk would help with her fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to touch. So we can see some of your adoring fans. They're your fans too. Daniel had carried a rabbit in a cage into the test area, soft white fur, a fluffy ball for a tail, and fierce black eyes. What are you doing? Running a test. His cheekbones, once the base structure of a beautifully sculpted face, had looked too large, and his natural restlessness had ballooned into an agitation, so that he stood to start the test on his computer, paced while it ran. She'd moved closer to where she could see the rabbit through the glass window of the test area. It had sat in the same spot in its cage, twitched its ears, and looked no different than it had when it sat on Daniel's bench. What are you looking for? She'd known it wasn't impossible that the gatherer's process would cause minute changes in cell function, but figured they would adapt. It was like taking a drop of water off the top of a bucket. Daniel stood beside her. Changes, decreased function, anything that would indicate damage. He was taller than her, all angles and hard edges, and she missed that intensity, the joy at seeing it soften. You'll have to cut it open to know for sure. The rabbit hopped twice, revealing a gray patch of fur on its opposite side. I have a control rabbit, but I want to check over an extended period of time. How long? Months? A year, maybe? A new wave of fatigue had rolled through her. She pulled a stool from beneath the bench and sat down, the desire to sleep overwhelming. You okay? She'd closed her eyes, the burn easing. It's been busy. She'd considered moving to the couch, but it would have taken too much energy to get there. Still want to do that walk? Daniel had laid his hand on her shoulders, and her need for him had rushed through her so intensely she felt dizzy, off balance. She'd leaned back into the hardness of his chest, absorbing the heat from him. Is anyone here? His answer had been to run his hand up the back of her neck, pulling gently on the roots of her hair. His lips had touched the base of her neck as every cell turned on, the energy from that simple touch flowing through her. If only she could have created a gatherer to gather that kind of energy. She'd spun her chair to face him and ran her hands up the taut muscles on the sides of his spine. She had thought briefly that he was thinner, but as his mouth had found hers, the thought was pulled away. It had been like this in the beginning, the rest of the world busy beyond the walls, a space only for the two of them. She'd kept her mouth on his, held him closer longer than she normally would, the need for him beyond anything the fans could offer. When he'd come up for air, his hair had fallen over his eyes, and she'd felt again the thrill of being at the center of that intense focus, as if he meant to consume her. He'd rolled the stool towards the couch, his hands tucked beneath her hips. She'd touched her lips to the salty skin of his neck. It had surprised her when he'd lifted her to the couch, the weight of him on top of her exquisite, holding her firm to the ground. She'd lifted her hips to his. What about the rabbit? The rabbit is fine.
Good. Okay, your last chance, word uppers. Does anyone have anything they want to read?
I apologize. I didn't know that was an option, so I did not prepare.
Well, next time. Yes,
Next time.
absolutely. Yeah, we usually give people about 5-minute opportunity to read something. So, yeah. Yeah. So the next word up is March 11th, and we're working on how to build suspense. So we're in the midst of booking our features, and we're continuing with the new format of these panels since our Zooms seem to be very interactive. So stay tuned and keep an eye out on our Facebook page and our website. And of course, if you have suggestions, anyone has suggestions, just let us know. So you can sign up for our newsletter at wordupbarrie.com. And of course, thanks to Rhubarb Media for hosting the website and Check Energy for hosting our Zoom. We wouldn't be here without our sponsors. So, and thank you guys, Word Uppers, for showing up. I hope this was of a benefit to you all.
Yeah, thanks everybody. It's always great to have everybody here. It's a nice treat.
I should mention, if I could, that the excerpt I read was from my first Harlequin romance from the contemporary romance series called Swept Away by the Enigmatic Tycoon.
Nice. And your links and the other two panelists that will remain on our website. So
thank you. Thanks very much for
people can
this
find you there.
evening.
Thank you guys.